The crypto universe and the SEC going head-to-head again as the SEC knocks down another 9 Bitcoin ETFs waiting for approval. But this time, Bitcoin is hanging tough, hovering around 6,400. Our Bob Pisani is at the New York Stock Exchange with more on that. Hey, Bob.
Hi, Melissa. The SEC has once again denied several proposals for a Bitcoin ETF. Now, this latest rejection involves 2 ETFs filed by ProShares that would track Bitcoin futures contracts, another from Granite Shares, and 5 leveraged and inverse ETFs from Direxion. Now, this comes, of course, on the heels of the SEC's rejection of the Winklevoss ETF in July. That would have traded physical Bitcoin. Now, similar to its rejection of the Winklevoss ETF, the SEC expressed concern about fraud and manipulation of Bitcoin markets. For example, it said that the NYSE ARCA, which filed the ProShares application, had not met its requirement, having rules that were sufficient to prevent fraud and manipulation. The SEC also specifically addressed the fact that the ProShares ETF would be tied to Bitcoin futures contracts, and they said that the NYSE ARCA had not demonstrated that Bitcoin futures markets were significantly large enough. But while they have yet to approve a crypto-based ETF, other applications are still on the table, including an ETF that would track a basket of cryptocurrencies. That was filed in July by Bitwise, and the VanEck SolidX Bitcoin Trust, which the SEC announced it was holding off on ruling on until September 30th. So we'll hear then about that one. Critics of the SEC's decision have told me that they are frustrated because they say the SEC has set a very, very high standard, maybe impossibly high. It's not clear what they would have to do to demonstrate that they are adequately preventing fraud and manipulation. Back to you, Melissa.
Bob, thanks. Bob Pisani at the NYSE. So if not now, when are the Bitcoin ETFs coming? Our crypto ballers over at the Plasma to break it all down for us speaks.
Yeah, sure. So let's get into it. So we had this rejection the other day. Most people, at least the sentiment was that we weren't going to get any ETFs. To me, February 2019 is probably the likeliest, the earliest that we can get it. Why do I say that? Bob just mentioned that the VanEck decision is going to come at the end of September. They actually have until February. So I would expect in September they push it off. We also talked, so that's 2019. Also, the surveillance. The SEC talked about fraud manipulation. It wasn't so much of preventing it, but how do they surveil it? Do they have an arrangement with other exchanges? Are they globally regulated or at a national level regulated exchanges so they can surveil what's going on, survey? And then finally, they said the futures market isn't mature enough. That's probably true at this point in time, although it's growing. So that's why I think as we get into 2019, we got a much better shot at it. Let's just clear that and then take a look at what's going on with the futures market. So here's CME futures, open interest of large holders. Since April, you're starting to see this big increase. That's about an 85% increase or growth rate that they're having here. So if you extrapolate that out, by February of 2019, you're going to have a very, very robust market in here. Add in something like the NYSE ICE-backed exchange that's coming out, that's going to add to it. And then finally, we still need to hear from Commissioner Hester, who in the past has said, you know what, SEC Commissioner Hester, who in the past has said these things need to be approved sooner than later. So actually, I think we're incrementally closer to getting an ETF. And the very positive thing was Bitcoin didn't sell off on this. So when a market, doesn't matter if it's Bitcoin or oil or anything, doesn't sell off on the news that it should, that means there's a sentiment change.
BK, I want to ask you a question because Hester Pierce had actually tweeted earlier this afternoon that yesterday's staff orders disapproving SRO rules related to a number of Bitcoin ETFs are stayed pending commission review.
Well, that's kind of interesting. I knew that was somewhat breaking out there, but basically what they're going to go back and look at it and say, have a review of it. So again, I think we're getting closer to it. They're going to look back and say, hey, wait a second, look at this 85% growth in CME open interest. Maybe that's a change. Let's look at it, whether there are other ways, and also, at least in my view, as whether or not the commission's decision to deny this is actually at this point maybe inhibiting some people from investing in the proper investments.
All right, Beek, so I totally agree. It no longer trades down on the multiple rejections. But how big of a deal would it actually be if one of them got approved?
I think it would be a huge deal, and here's why. If you look at where the demand for this product's coming from, and by that I mean Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, it's from the retail investor. The institutional investors are knocking on my door, but they haven't pulled the trigger yet, he says easily. But the retail investor has already said they want to buy this. They've already shown that last year. And in retail accounts in the U.S., there's about $50 trillion of AUM. That's a lot of money. It would only take a small portion of that to go into an ETF to spark a nice rally in Bitcoin.
Let me ask you this. Let's say they approve an ETF and Bitcoin doesn't do anything.
Well, that's a problem.
Would that be a problem?
Right?
Would that cause you some pause?
Yeah, of course it would. But again, it also goes back to how did it go into the decision, right? So Bitcoin's down after the last decision. If they approved it today, I'd be very shocked if it didn't go up. But if you have a massive rally going into it and they approve it, then the expectations are in the market. So again, just like my lawyer said at the top of the show, it depends. That'll be $1,500.